Sometimes this state can be extraordinarily difficult to recognize. One might find themselves entangled in relationships that, while seemingly perfect at times, leave behind an inexplicable, oppressive feeling of inner emptiness. Again and again their intuition persistently whispers that something is deeply wrong, yet they are unable to pinpoint the source of this unease. This is one of the greatest and most complex challenges in any romantic connection. How to recognize with absolute clarity what truly matters, how to unmistakably define the boundaries that should never be crossed, and finally, how to connect with the true, authentic essence of one's own being. What if this seeming idyll conceals a deeper, unsettling truth that, once revealed, will forever alter one's perception of love and self? The eminent Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, whose ideas profoundly influenced our understanding of the human psyche, posited that our relationships serve not merely as mirrors, but as complex reflections of hidden, often unconscious, aspects of ourselves. If one remains unaware of these concealed elements of their psyche, the parts of themselves residing in the depths of their shadow, they risk repeatedly falling into destructive behavioral patterns, oblivious to the true causes of their struggles. For Jung, the shadow was not an abstract, ephemeral concept. It is an integral, living part of who we are, an aspect we often refuse to see, yet it is always present, patiently awaiting recognition and integration. This shadow consists of everything one denies within themselves, everything they avoid confronting in their inner world. When this shadow is unconsciously projected onto others, there's a powerful tendency to see in them precisely those qualities one refuses to acknowledge in oneself. And it is this projection mechanism that can tragically lead an individual to tolerate and accept behavior in romantic relationships that should never, under any circumstances, be endured. True understanding begins with realizing how this invisible force shapes our choices and why we sometimes seem fated to repeat the same mistakes. Often, one finds themselves in situations where they accept abusive, dismissive, or even simply negligent treatment from others. This often stems from deeply ingrained beliefs that true love must endure any hardship, or from a mistaken notion of one's own responsibility to change another individual's behavior. However, as the distinguished thinker Carl Gustav Jung pointed out, such leniency is not merely a mistake, but a profound delusion. In his view, when people permit such treatment towards themselves, they are in fact projecting aspects of their own shadow, those traits and qualities they lack the courage to confront or accept within themselves. It is crucially important to realize that a person's authentic worth is not determined by the actions or words of others. If relationships constantly drain one's vital energy, if they compel one to deviate from their true essence, ceasing to be themselves, then such connections cannot be considered healthy and should not be tolerated long-term. On the contrary, a genuine and constructive bond between people is built upon a foundation of mutual respect, sincere recognition of each person's unique authenticity, and reciprocal support for personal growth, rather than on sacrifice or self-abnegation by one for the other. One should reflect on the moments when they unconsciously allowed their energy to wane. Often such situations are not obvious displays of rudeness or direct conflict. Perhaps it was subtle manipulation disguised as care, or a hurtful comment cleverly masked as an innocent joke. Frequently, it also manifests in systematically unkept promises that erode trust. Over time, these seemingly minor and isolated moments gradually accumulate. What was initially perceived as merely a slight spark of discomfort gradually transforms into a veritable fire, capable of consuming one's inner peace and harmony. According to Carl Gustav Jung's teachings, such a progression of events serves as a clear and unambiguous indication that the individual has lost harmony with their authentic self, with their deepest and intrinsic essence. Each time one allows such occurrences, they take another step away from their own authenticity, distancing themselves from who they truly are. Within this profound transformational process, Carl Gustav Jung consistently emphasized the vital necessity of assuming comprehensive, radical responsibility for one's own role in interpersonal interactions. This is by no means about merely seeking blame or shifting the burden onto another person. Rather, the key lies in a deep understanding of the internal motivations that lead an individual to tolerate or even accept certain behavioral patterns from a partner. Jung firmly asserted that the true path to personal development and self-realization runs through a courageous confrontation with one's so-called shadows, those repressed, unrecognized, or even frightening aspects of the self that we sometimes fear to even acknowledge. Only when one successfully integrates these hidden parts of their psyche do they cease to unconsciously project them onto others, and their decisions regarding relationships become significantly more conscious and wise, fully aligning with their true inner state and authentic essence. In light of these principles, a natural question arises: what is absolutely unacceptable in romantic relationships? Experts in psychology and interpersonal connections agree that one should never tolerate any behaviors that make a person feel inadequate or insufficient as they truly are. Also unacceptable is anything that systematically and constantly threatens an individual's inner peace, disrupting their emotional balance and harmony. And certainly, one should unequivocally reject any situations or behavioral patterns that lead to the loss of one's identity, the erosion of self-worth, and the understanding of what one truly deserves. Healthy and harmonious relationships are never built on endless sacrifices from one partner or on demands for them to fundamentally change to meet someone else's expectations. In truly fulfilling and thriving unions, both partners find the necessary space to freely express their individuality for continuous personal growth without risking losing themselves in the shared journey. It's easy to succumb to the common misconception that love should be absolutely unconditional, that an individual must tolerate everything, and that their responsibility lies in changing others for a relationship to function successfully. However, Jung, the great thinker, taught us that such a notion is not merely a mistake or miscalculation. On the contrary, it becomes a form of resolute denial of one's own authenticity. True romantic relationships, in his view, should represent a harmonious interaction between two whole and self-sufficient human beings, not an exhausting struggle to save what was never meant to be saved in the first place. There is something exceptionally powerful in the ability to firmly say no to what causes suffering or discomfort, even when such a decision seems incredibly difficult. This act is a profound manifestation of self-love, an act of self-respect. It serves as an important reminder that one's own well-being must be the highest priority, and therefore one should never put up with relationships that make them feel worse than they truly are, diminishing their dignity. When one allows relationships to completely consume them, making them feel unworthy or undeserving of love, they inadvertently confirm and strengthen the projection of their own shadow onto another person. This is an unconscious transfer of hidden, unrecognized aspects of one's personality. And what often goes unnoticed or unacknowledged is this. This projection is, in essence, an internal wound, a damage that only the individual themselves can heal. No one else can do this work for them. Carl Jung held the conviction that the unconscious exerts a colossal influence on human thoughts, behavioral patterns, and, notably, on interpersonal relationships. Often, without realizing it, individuals become entangled in cyclical patterns and recurring scenarios that echo past experiences, especially those deeply rooted in unresolved psychological traumas. These internal wounds, left unhealed, invisibly guide one's choices, prompting them to form connections with those who are capable of inflicting emotional, psychological, or even physical harm. Meanwhile, one might remain bewildered as to the reasons for such persistent repetition of these events. Why, despite a deep longing for love and harmony, does one repeatedly find themselves in relationships that bring suffering? Thus, a pertinent question arises: how can one identify the operation of this invisible influence? The answer lies in the phenomenon of repetition. When an individual repeatedly experiences the same emotional distress and suffering, despite a change in the people involved, the underlying storyline invariably appears disturbingly familiar. This state resembles a déjà vu effect, yet it is not merely a whimsical trick of the mind or a memory lapse. On the contrary, it is a clear signal, an unambiguous message from one's deeper self, indicating that something within them requires awareness, healing, and fundamental transformation. The primary step toward building healthier and more fulfilling interpersonal connections does not lie in attempting to change another person. It is not about forcing your partner to transform or cherishing the hope that they will suddenly start treating you better. The true path begins from within. One must turn to themselves, examine their own personality with utmost honesty and genuine compassion. Carl Jung, the eminent thinker, taught that true transformation begins when an individual is willing to confront their inner darkness. The purpose of this confrontation is not to fight it or deny its existence, but to deeply comprehend its essence. And no, this process is by no means easy. In fact, it is one of the most challenging trials one will ever face. It is far more convenient to turn away, avoid looking in the mirror, and continue living without asking too many questions or delving into the layers of pain and memories that lie within. However, it is precisely this self-awareness, this deep, often uncomfortable confrontation with one's self, that becomes the most powerful tool for personal growth. It helps one recognize what they should never tolerate again, for how others treat them is often a direct reflection of how they treat themselves. If an individual consistently allows others to disregard their boundaries, if they accept indifference, cruelty, or emotional manipulation as an inherent part of love, their unconscious begins to believe a dangerous lie. I am unworthy of love. I do not deserve respect. And this belief, though unspoken, steadily begins to shape their reality. Sometimes, at first, these manifestations of dysfunction may seem quite minor, almost imperceptible to an outsider. It could be a sarcastic remark, a fleeting cold glance, or a barely perceptible dismissive gesture. One tends to convince themselves that such trifles are insignificant, finding rational explanations and justifications for what is happening. However, over time, these seemingly inconsequential moments inevitably accumulate. And it's not just interpersonal connections that are undermined. A person's self-esteem, their inner confidence, their ability to trust their own judgment, and to make sound, healthy decisions are also impacted. This is why it is critically important to grasp a fundamental truth. One's self-worth is by no means determined by how anyone else treats them. This intrinsic value is non-negotiable and not a subject for bargaining. It cannot be taken away, diminished, or validated by another's opinion. It is inherent in everyone from the start, an integral part of their being, and no relationship, no matter how deep or familiar, should ever lead to a feeling of inadequacy or insufficiency. As Jung rightly observed, the people we are irresistibly drawn to and the relationships we enter often act as mirrors. They not only reflect the current state of our inner world, but also clearly demonstrate the lessons we still need to learn. If one finds themselves repeatedly involved in relationships characterized by constant conflict, emotional detachment, or manipulation, this cannot be attributed to mere bad luck. It is an unmistakable message, an important lesson persistently trying to cut through the daily noise and chaos. It is a clear sign that something within the individual themselves requires careful attention and deep introspection. There comes a time when everyone needs to ask themselves deep and sometimes uncomfortable questions, to frankly confront their own decisions and analyze the origins of their behavioral patterns. Why does an individual continue to tolerate destructive behaviors that cause them suffering? What compels them to remain where their inner voice urgently prompts them to leave? Why do they offer their affection and tenderness to those who cannot reciprocate or who show clear disregard for it? The answers to such inquiries are rarely superficial, but invariably bring long-awaited clarity. Often the true reason for such choices is buried under years of deeply ingrained fear. It could be the fear of abandonment, the fear of rejection, or the apprehension of being inadequate, not good enough. Or it might lie behind destructive beliefs imposing internal limitations inherited during childhood, shaped by one's environment, or resulting from early life experiences that instilled the idea of needing to earn love through suffering. However, the fundamental truth is this: the healing process begins the moment one masters the art of unequivocally refusing anything that causes them pain. This happens when they draw a clear boundary, not out of momentary anger, but from a deep and conscious sense of self-respect. When they choose not to compromise with themselves, not to shrink internally, and not to sacrifice their precious inner peace for fleeting, often questionable, connection. This conscious decision to show unwavering respect for one's own boundaries and to resolutely distance oneself from anything that does not contribute to one's well-being undoubtedly represents a manifestation of outstanding courage and inner strength. It means the individual is prepared for self-sufficiency if the situation demands it, preferring solitude, rather than clinging to circumstances that inevitably drain their vitality. Such a decision testifies to a deep understanding. Loneliness often proves far less agonizing than a connection that relentlessly depletes the soul. In this act of self-determination, a conscious choice in favor of one's own person is manifested. It is precisely in this way, not in abstract deliberations but in daily practice, that genuine self-respect is formed. And each time one resolutely rejects pain, they simultaneously open themselves to something significantly greater. They say yes to love that truly nourishes, to relationships built on unwavering truth rather than crippling fear, and to the possibility of establishing a connection that uplifts the spirit rather than diminishes its dignity. When one begins to act from this new, confident state, when they truly recognize their own significance and live in full alignment with it, their interaction with the world fundamentally changes. They stop repeating the same destructive cycles because they have internally rewritten their life script. Now they are no longer attracted to people who merely mirror their past wounds and unhealed traumas. Instead, they begin to resonate with those who embody their own healing and inner transformation. This encapsulates Carl Gustav Jung's profound wisdom. One's outer world transforms only when a deep change occurs within their inner world. And while such a process of self-discovery and growth is never easy, it invariably justifies all the effort and emotional turmoil. For beyond this comprehensive transformation awaits the embodiment of a person who has achieved wholeness, become truly strong, and finally, completely free. This renewed version of self will no longer make the mistake of confusing pain with genuine love. It will stop chasing what can only wound and deplete. It will no longer settle for less than it deserves. Instead, it will choose inner peace. It will choose unwavering truth. And most importantly, it will choose love. The kind of true love that doesn't seek external validation but originates and blossoms deep within oneself. According to Carl Jung's views, true attachment should never imply the loss of one's inner essence. In the context of healthy relationships, a deep sense of love is nourished by mutual respect, genuine acceptance of individuality, and a shared pursuit of personal growth. There is no need for one to sacrifice themselves or completely dissolve into another to make them feel comfortable or satisfied. Authentic love does not demand self-renunciation. On the contrary, it wholly encourages and calls for the manifestation of true authenticity. As one embarks on a path of deep self-discovery and inner liberation, they inevitably begin to notice how the nature of their personal connections transforms. Individuals who genuinely honor their boundaries, value their energy, and respect their unique essence naturally begin to be drawn to them. At the same time, those who do not harmonize with their true self, who are unable to match their increasing level of awareness, gradually and subtly exit their life, without the need for active pushing away. This illustrates the powerful force of synchronicity, one of the deepest and most significant concepts developed by Jung. Synchronicity is not merely an abstract philosophical idea, but a tangible reality that reveals itself when one fully aligns with their authentic self. This phenomenon emerges when an individual ceases to relentlessly seek external validation and begins to deeply understand that everything necessary for their well-being and completeness already resides within themselves. There is something incredibly liberating in no longer pretending to be someone one is not, merely for the sake of approval or love. The path to healing and inner freedom does not happen instantly. It is a thorough, often uncomfortable process that requires endurance, gentleness, and above all, a deep commitment to one's own self. However, once an individual begins to make decisions truly resonant with their inner truth, they feel a surge of strength, become more resilient, and gain the ability to build relationships that genuinely nourish their soul. Such a person begins to recognize red flags long before a connection becomes emotionally draining. They develop a heightened understanding of what they truly need to feel whole, and they stop ignoring those subtle, internal signals, premonitions, quiet warnings from within that have always sought to guide them in the right direction. Jung taught that one should listen not only to others, but also to themselves, to that inner voice so often silenced due to fears or the desire to maintain harmony. Neglecting this voice can lead to recurring cycles of pain and emotional entrapment. It is crucial to pay attention to moments when something feels off, especially when relationships begin to demand more from a person than they can or wish to give, without offering anything in return. Genuine, deep relationships based on mutual affection should in no way become an arena for endless conflicts. True love, by its very nature, precludes a permanent state of confrontation or tension. When one finds themselves in a situation where they constantly feel as if they are on edge, where the emotional connection seems extremely unstable and fragile, this highly likely indicates that the individual is tolerating conditions that are completely unacceptable and detrimental to their well-being. The eminent thinker Carl Jung asserted that everyone should strive for relationships that stimulate personal growth and development, that challenge an individual to become their best self, but that by no means imply a renunciation of one's authentic essence. If one ever experiences a feeling as though their soul is constrained and cannot breathe freely, or their inner spirit is oppressed and shrinks in the presence of another, this serves as an unambiguous and clear signal that something vitally important to their inner world is being systematically ignored or suppressed. A key element in recognizing when interpersonal connections become absolutely unbearable and destructive lies in one's ability to look at themselves with uncompromising, even harsh, honesty. Indeed, when deeply emotionally involved with another individual, it is exceedingly easy to find justifications for troubling circumstances. People tend to convince themselves that things will normalize over time, that their partner will surely change for the better, or that they just need to endure a little longer under these conditions. However, such rationalizations often serve as sophisticated and subtle mechanisms to evade confronting an uncomfortable truth. Relationships that systematically instill a sense of inadequacy or, even more destructively, demand complete renunciation of one's individuality and principles for the sake of preserving an illusory calm and peace absolutely do not deserve one's precious time or vital energy. Jung, the eminent thinker, emphasized the vital importance of individuation, a lifelong, continuous process aimed at becoming the most authentic version of oneself. This involves remaining true to one's core essence, refusing to conform to the expectations or desires of others. It is critically important not to sacrifice one's authenticity by succumbing to the pressure of fear. Whether it's the fear of loneliness, the fear of rejection, or anxiety about the unknown, each of these fears can push one to compromise with themselves. Releasing what no longer serves or aligns with one's inner convictions is a true act of courage. It is not just an action, but a declaration of one's own worth. Ultimately, to become who one truly is requires immense courage and determination. Relationships are meant to be a sacred haven where both parties feel completely safe, seen, supported, and genuinely valued for their true individuality. If an individual finds themselves continuously adjusting or downplaying their true characteristics merely to gain acceptance, if they feel unable to express their genuine beliefs or display authentic sincerity, it indicates that something is fundamentally broken at the very core of the interaction. The essence is not about achieving flawlessness or an ideal. It is about mutual acknowledgement and unconditional affection. And when this fundamental element is lacking, when relationships force one to conceal aspects of their personality to be loved, it is highly probable that something destructive and toxic is gradually taking root. Truly loving relationships should serve as a safe haven, not a stage for constant performance or disguise. When an individual consistently finds themselves in situations where they must suppress their true emotions, conceal cherished dreams, or stifle deepest desires solely to maintain a relationship, such a connection, in its very essence, lacks genuine mutual understanding and profound respect. The renowned thinker Carl Jung consistently reminded humanity that the most fundamental and significant relationship one can have in life is with oneself. If an individual does not show proper respect for their own identity, if they do not allow themselves to be authentic, to be who they truly are, then for any other individual, recognizing and accepting that person becomes virtually impossible. There comes a point when it is critically important to recognize when a relationship begins to have a deeply destructive and detrimental impact on an individual. This certainly does not mean that every relationship must be entirely free of contradictions or completely conflict-free. In reality, every human connection inevitably faces its unique challenges and trials. However, if these difficulties transform into an unending series of suffering, if conflict becomes the norm and a dominant pattern of interaction, and if resolving disputes seems like an unattainable distant dream, then one should strongly consider questioning the very foundation and validity of such relationships. To free oneself from what or who does not resonate with one's authentic truth does not mean failure or defeat. On the contrary, it signifies significant personal growth, indicating that the individual has reached a new level of maturity. It also means they have made a conscious choice for their own well-being, prioritizing their identity and inner harmony. Such a decision is one of the most powerful and meaningful actions a person can take in their life. For at the very moment they return to their core essence, embrace their true nature, the universe responds not with disorder and chaos, but with crystalline clarity, not with loss, but with a complete and harmonious alignment with the flow of existence. Those truly meant for you will bring a sense of deep peace, not create constant tension or pressure. They will unwaveringly respect your personal boundaries, not seek to question or violate them. Such individuals will joyfully embrace your unique radiance, not try to dim it or force you to change. This is the outcome of a conscious choice to prioritize yourself. When an individual decides to value their own essence, all aspects of their environment begin to mirror this inner choice. The great thinker Carl Jung urged people to confront their inner shadows, those aspects of the personality that are typically hidden or suppressed, and to recognize their manifestations not only within themselves, but also in others. Consequently, if an individual finds themselves in relationships that systematically cause a feeling of inner discomfort or suppression, this should not be seen as a mere coincidence or turn of events. Rather, it is an unspoken message from the depths of one's unconscious, a kind of call to awakening that urgently requires the individual to move beyond superficial manifestations and grasp the deeper, hidden essence of what is happening. It's important to recognize that toxic influence sometimes doesn't manifest in blatant or easily discernible forms. It doesn't always come as open humiliation, obvious manipulation, or unambiguous acts of betrayal. Often it begins subtly, imperceptibly, disguised as barely noticeable manipulations, passive-aggressive remarks skillfully hidden under the guise of humor, or even in relationships that seem utterly insignificant at first glance. Nevertheless, these seemingly minor actions have a profound and cumulative effect on the psyche. Each time an individual tolerates what feels wrong, no matter how minor it may seem, they are, consciously or unconsciously, essentially giving permission for such treatment. Carl Gustav Jung strongly urged every individual to take the reins in their interpersonal interactions, to relinquish the role of resigned hostages to external circumstances, and to begin making deliberate and conscious decisions. One possesses the inner power to radically change the trajectory of their own life simply by defining which manifestations and situations they are willing to accept and which they categorically reject. Genuine emotional liberation occurs the moment an individual grants themselves the right to utter a firm and decisive no. This no is directed at all forms of manipulative influence, at expressions of disrespect toward oneself, and at those expectations from others that relentlessly consume one's vital energy and deplete the inner spirit. True freedom, it is asserted, does not lie in attempting to transform other people. Rather, it is rooted in changing one's own attitude toward these people and the world as a whole. When an individual masters the art of establishing clear and inviolable boundaries, when they allow themselves to leave without regret those situations or relationships that do not nourish their inner world and do not bring inner satisfaction, then they will inevitably experience a profound and comprehensive sense of liberation. This state is precisely the genuine healing that Jung spoke of in his works. It is about taking full control over one's own psyche, freeing oneself from all bonds that shackle and limit the personality, and creating free space for everything that contributes to the blossoming and flourishing of individuality. This is by no means an act of selfishness. On the contrary, it is about deep fidelity to oneself, one's principles, and true desires. By demonstrating profound respect for one's own identity and unequivocally refusing to tolerate harm from others, an individual transmits an unambiguous and powerful message to the universe. This message declares they are fully prepared for the process of healing, for steady growth, and for living in complete harmony with their authentic and unique essence. Only when one begins to act from their true authenticity do they gain the ability to attract into their life precisely what they truly deserve. True allies, those who resonate with their inner vibration and honor their personal space, naturally begin to enter their circle. By shedding the burden of what has lost its usefulness or exhausted itself, one creates space for what genuinely enriches their existence, provides necessary support, and contributes to their personal development. Initially, it is often significantly challenging for an individual to determine exactly what they need to let go of. They might find themselves immersed in a relationship dynamic where the feeling of attachment is mistakenly equated with endless patience for behavioral patterns that drain their vital energy, thereby undermining their self-perception and sense of self-worth. However, it is precisely during such agonizing periods that crystalline clarity emerges. When suffering reaches its peak, when a feeling of complete emotional emptiness sets in, it is then that a fundamental truth is revealed. One vitally needs to release the past to achieve inner peace and tranquility. The eminent thinker Carl Jung affirmed the fundamental importance of an individual's awareness of their own deep psychological traumas and how these influence the formation of their interpersonal connections. When these inner wounds are not healed, one inevitably attracts situations that are a mirror reflection of their unresolved inner conflicts, fears, and suppressed desires. Have you ever felt that your existence is entirely dedicated to the needs and expectations of others? That your self-worth is determined solely by what others think of you or what they do for you? Such relationships are extremely unstable and fragile as they lack a genuine, deep connection. Their foundation is exclusively emotional dependence. As Carl Jung emphasized, true emotional independence is achieved only when one frees themselves from external conditioning and begins to draw strength from their own inner essence. Only by cultivating deep self-love, demonstrating unconditional self-respect, and refusing to allow others to define their own worth, can an individual build relationships founded on reciprocity, sincere respect, and undeniable authenticity. Relationships, in essence, are not about finding someone who can merely complete one's personality. Their true purpose lies in finding a companion with whom one is ready to share their life journey. This should be someone who deeply respects their individuality, genuinely values their dreams, and actively contributes to their personal development. If an individual constantly makes concessions in a partnership, sacrificing themselves solely to please another, they inevitably drift away from their authentic self. As Jung asserted, only through the process of shadow integration, that is, accepting and acknowledging those aspects of one's personality that evoke fear or rejection, does one gain the ability to be completely oneself in relationships. It is in this state that a true, deep connection originates, where an individual can express their authenticity without fear of judgment or potential rejection. When an individual disregards their own limits of tolerance, the harm they unconsciously permit is invisible but penetrates deep into the core of their being. Minor manifestations of manipulation, unfulfilled promises, a deficit of empathy, and basic respect. All these factors gradually accumulate, methodically draining one's inner resources and zest for life. Eventually, at some point, an individual finds themselves in a state of complete emotional burnout, bewildered as to how they ended up in such a deplorable condition. However, the situation is by no means hopeless. Every individual has the full capacity to rewrite this script. They are granted the power to reevaluate their relationships with others, regain lost control over their own life, and consciously choose a path based on self-respect and genuine authenticity. The process of recovery and healing begins with deep awareness. This occurs at the crucial moment when one grasps that they deserve better, that their environment should consist of those who inspire and support them, rather than drain their vital energy. The path to self-discovery is certainly not strewn with roses and can be arduous, yet traversing it is absolutely essential. It is on this path that an individual gains the ability to firmly establish personal boundaries, decisively distance themselves from destructive influences, and adopt a way of life where they are genuinely free to be themselves. The renowned thinker Carl Jung asserted that an individual's emotional well-being is inextricably linked to their ability to clearly recognize, firmly establish, and effectively defend their personal boundaries. This by no means implies becoming an inflexible or alienated person aiming to completely isolate themselves from others. On the contrary, the essence lies in a deep and comprehensive understanding of precisely what is necessary for maintaining one's own mental and emotional health. Boundaries serve as a fundamental form of self-respect, acting as a silent but firm message to oneself and others about what is acceptable and what is absolutely intolerable. In cases where these boundaries remain unattended, there arises a serious risk of internal resource depletion, loss of one's own path, and consequently alienation from one's true self. Relationships that relentlessly demand all of one's resources without offering anything in return, that drain one's vital energy instead of replenishing it, cannot be called love. Such a dynamic, rather, acts as a distraction, leading one away from their true life purpose. It is, in essence, a continuous cycle of emotional exhaustion that prevents an individual from fully realizing their potential. The renowned thinker, Carl Gustav Jung, particularly emphasized the critical importance of recognizing recurring patterns in interpersonal connections, especially those that seemingly condemn an individual to endless cycles of pain and deep dissatisfaction. When one repeatedly finds themselves involved in relationships that make them feel insignificant, inadequate, or constantly criticized, this is rarely a simple coincidence. On the contrary, such a state of affairs is often a direct consequence of unresolved experiences rooted in the depths of their past. These recurring behavioral patterns do not arise by chance. According to Jung's teachings, they serve as valuable opportunities for deep self-exploration and personal growth. They represent a kind of invitation to carefully examine those unhealed wounds hidden within, and finally, to address those aspects of the self that have long been ignored or suppressed. When one discovers that the same problems consistently resurface in their relationships, it becomes vitally important to pause and ask, what exactly attracts them to such a dynamic? What part of them still needs healing, and what lessons might they be stubbornly avoiding? The moment an individual begins to heal their own inner wounds, when they stop blaming themselves for circumstances beyond their control, and when they master the art of establishing healthy, clear boundaries, then and only then does the path open to forming genuine, deep connections. True relationships founded on unwavering mutual respect and profound understanding never require an individual to sacrifice their selfhood or compromise their interests. Love, by its very nature, is not a battlefield or an arena for conflict. On the contrary, it is intended to be a sanctuary, a safe haven where two souls can uplift and support each other while preserving their unique authenticity and integrity. In this comprehensive transformational process leading to personal growth and harmony, self-love plays a truly indispensable cornerstone role. Only when one masters the art of genuinely loving and deeply respecting themselves do they gain the ability to attract and build relationships that truly value their individuality and contribution. A feeling that, under the guise of attachment, demands an individual change diminish their expressions, or completely abandon cherished dreams and aspirations cannot be called true love. It is rather veiled control hidden beneath a facade of tenderness and care. One's path is not to indulge the desires of others at the expense of their own well-being and happiness, but to consciously create a life that is in complete harmony with their authentic, core essence. Existence is not merely a collection of events that happen to an individual. It is, first and foremost, a conscious choice of how one decides to react to these events, how they interpret them, and how they act in response. Every new relationship, every emerging challenge, and every moment of discomfort provides a unique opportunity for deeper self-discovery, to peel back the outer layers of one's being and to fully blossom into the person they are destined to become. When one frees themselves from what no longer serves them, be it toxic relationships, harmful beliefs, or self-destructive habits, they regain lost power over their own life. Such a step opens up space for phenomena that energize them, motivate them to new achievements, and contribute to their development, helping them transform into a more perfected embodiment of themselves. However, this road to deep self-discovery and inner healing is not always strewn with roses. Undoubtedly, there will be moments when an individual feels tempted to revert to familiar patterns of behavior, to known, albeit harmful, interaction models, simply because they create an illusion of comfort. But genuine transformation occurs only when one consciously chooses to embody the life lessons learned, rather than replicate closed loops that are no longer productive. Personal growth invariably demands the display of true courage. It calls upon one to shed the shackles of perceived security and bravely step into the unknown. At times, the path to becoming one's best self involves making difficult, sometimes painful, decisions. This includes the necessity of freeing oneself from connections with people, abandoning established habits, or changing circumstances that no longer harmonize with one's deep, true self. The essence is not to close old doors, but to open new horizons of opportunity. When one finally makes the decisive choice to stop tolerating what harms them, they are by no means imposing limitations on themselves. On the contrary, they are significantly expanding their horizons of possibility. The individual enters a different reality, where their inner energy is securely protected, their self-worth is unconditionally recognized, and their existence is filled with relationships and experiences that elevate them rather than diminish their dignity. The path of existence often gains clarity and a sense of ease when one consciously releases what no longer serves their growth. The renowned psychoanalyst Jung, for instance, held the conviction that the deep unconscious continuously guides an individual toward their true purpose, offering subtle hints and gently nudging them toward personal growth. Every time a decision is made that harmonizes with one's true self, the universe seems to respond. Then various aspects of life begin to align in a way that is perceived as organic, balanced, and truly fulfilling. It is in this process that the true beauty of healing, the courage to choose oneself, and the attainment of one's own inner power lie. The more deeply an individual accepts themselves in their authenticity, the more favorably the circumstances of their existence unfold. And the more diligently one masters the art of establishing healthy boundaries, learns to fully love themselves, and decisively distances from everything that drains them, the closer they draw to an existence filled with genuine peace, deep satisfaction, and true meaning. In the current era, more than ever before, it becomes critically important to dedicate time to deep self-reflection. An individual should ask themselves a series of fundamental questions. What relationships do they allow into their life, and how do these influence their path? What behaviors do they continue to tolerate, even though they clearly hinder their progress? Do they surround themselves with those who contribute to their personal development, or do they still permit destructive dynamics to shackle their potential? It is essential to always remember that self-love and self-respect must occupy a central place in every person's priority system. Only when an individual genuinely and deeply loves themselves can they build healthy relationships with others without dissolving into external needs. This is by no means a manifestation of selfishness. On the contrary, it is an awareness of one's own emotional needs and a clear understanding of what is truly necessary for achieving inner tranquility and harmony. To look into the depths of one's inner world, to frankly acknowledge aspects requiring healing, and to make those life-altering decisions that lead to a life worthy of its possessor, requires considerable courage and